What message do you have for the player who always strives for perfection, trying to be perfect all the time, even though, especially in a sport like baseball, it's impossible to achieve?
Yeah. Well, first of all, perfection is a losing game. And people say, well, yeah, but you should chase perfection. No, you should chase excellence. So, like, suppose you're an archer and there's a bullseye. And getting the center of the bullseye, that's excellent. But if you say, oh, I got the center, but I have to get the center of the center, I have to get the bullseye of the bullseye, you don't get any more points for that. So every once in a while, when I pass exams back, and you could see somebody gets a 94, but their friend gets a 96. They both get A's, but the 94 isn't happy because somebody got a 96. You both got it. Enough's enough. Right. I mean, you have to know when enough is enough. And in the end, perfection will get you to retire early. If you're that much of a perfectionist, you'll never be satisfied. And there has to be a time when you say, wow, that felt great. Wow, I did my best. We might have lost, but wow, I'm improving. Not like, it's sort of like saying, we're in New Jersey. Okay, we're going to drive on the Parkway, but we want to get to be the first car on the Parkway. We want to be ahead of everybody. There's always going to be a car ahead of you. There's no end to it. And so there's always going to be somebody, and especially baseball. What do they call somebody in the major leagues that gets a hit 3 times out of 10? They call him a multimillionaire. But he failed 70% of the time. So this is so important that, there's a time when good enough is good enough. And there's a big difference between, excellence and perfection. Chase excellence, don't chase perfection. I mean, perfection leads to eating disorders,
Yeah, how can a player obtain that when they have maybe external people, voices, maybe coaches or parents who are constantly repeating that and saying, look what you didn't get your job done. You got to do this differently, and it's becoming overwhelming for the player.
Yeah, let me tell you the parents. Here's what the parents should do after the game. You should go up to your kid and say, wow, I love to watch you play. That's it. I love to watch you play. You don't have what's called this PGA, this post-game analysis, where you're taking the kid home after the game and the kid's in the back seat and you and your spouse are there saying, well, you should have done this, you should have done that. And the parent knows nothing about baseball and they're telling, you should have bunted on 2 strikes, whatever. And no, so the simple answer is choose good parents and choose good coaches, but kids don't have choices,
There's a lot of kids out there who are experiencing coaches who are being not just hard on them, but kind of tearing down their self-esteem. And after maybe a bad outing or a hitter who struck out a couple times in a game, how important is it for the coaches to build up the self-esteem of their players?
Well, I would say that you want to know if you're a good coach, especially at youth league. If you have 15 players on your team and you're coaching 9-year-olds, how many of those 15 are going to be playing when they're 10-year-olds? If your kids will play baseball or whatever sport the next year, then you're a good coach, because then you're instilling the love of the sport. If you say, well, we were 15-0 this year, who cares? But if you have 15 player next year, then you're 15-0,
I've seen in high school too, so many kids, they play freshman year, then maybe they'll play sophomore year, and then they're done, and then they drop out because they didn't want to deal with that type of environment.
There's research on that, and 75% of kids in America drop out of organized sports by age 14. That's pretty sad.
It is. What could they do, or whether it's the coaches or somehow the player themselves, how can they create a more positive outlook on it, environment, especially when they're surrounded by people who might be making it more negative?
I think we have to train coaches better. And, we just kind of have people that are taking the passion for it. Here you have these, like, you've heard the stories. Kids are coming home from an away game and they lost and they're having a good time, and the coach says, I don't want anybody, laughing, we lost. So you lost, big deal.
I feel like it all begins with the parents and coaches being willing to want to learn more and not being just fixated on what they've done in the past and just stopping there. Because if you're unwilling to learn more about the game, learn more about how to improve yourself as a coach or parent or whatever, it's going to be difficult for you to then pass that on to your player.
Well, one of the great coaching stories from northern New Jersey, there was a quarterback for the New York Giants named Phil Simms, and he probably had the best Super Bowl any quarterback ever had in the history of the Super Bowl. And I think this was one of his sons was at Ramapo High School. So Phil used to go to the games. He'd sit all by himself. You know, he had striking blonde hair, so he'd wear a baseball cap and sit all by himself, and he never would say anything. He'd come to the game. He'd leave the game. He would never talk to the coaches. He would never talk to his kid. He'd just go home. He'd never yell, scream, or anything. There's nobody in the whole country that knows more about quarterbacking than Phil Simms, and he kept his mouth shut. So that's so how many lesser than Phil Simms are there that are giving their kids advice? Oh, on 3rd and 1, you should have done this. No, just keep your mouth shut, Just love to watch your kid play. Winning is not that important. Improvement is.
Right. How do you think players can deal with pre-performance anxiety, especially when they're having a big game, but at the same time not treating that game differently, especially if it's a playoff game, than they've done with all the games in the past? They got to treat it the same, right?
Well, that's like saying, well, suppose a player has a big game coming up. How could they be stronger? Well, you got to train yourself. I mean, you have to train yourself on relaxation, stress reduction techniques. Like in my classes, I've been passing this out, Beeman's gum. And I give my students Beeman's gum, and the reason I show them videos about the greatest test pilot in America's history is Chuck Yeager. He broke the sound barrier in a plane. He did things scarier than what the astronauts did. I mean, he was like the first. They didn't know whether the plane would blow up, but every time he got on into the cockpit, he had this ritual. He started chewing on a piece of gum. That was his ritual. So some people, their ritual in basketball, bounce the ball, inhale, exhale. So you need rituals, Right.
How dangerous is it to say that today's not my day, or they have that feeling before the game that it's just not going to go in their favor? How detrimental could that be?
How detrimental? Well, first of all, why would you want to say it? Second of all, we could teach a whole class on how, on people not feeling their best. They did their best. Like in Boston, John Havlicek, one of the great games he ever had, he came out of the hospital. I mean, you hear these stories all the time. Right. So the exciting thing about sports is you never know. We were talking about Kirk Gibson in class. Right. I mean, he could hardly walk, and he hits a home run to win the game,
Right. How can a player adapt to a situation where their coach might not truly understand the mental side of the game and the importance of it? And if they really don't incorporate it into their practice plans or just their overall coaching style, how could the player navigate that?
Well, the players just have to deal with it. I mean, because a player's not going to control an adult, unfortunately. Right. But if it's really detrimental, the parent should get involved and get rid of the coach. Yeah. I mean, especially if it's abusive.
Have you ever seen any circumstances where things got out of hand with how a certain situation unfolded at maybe a high school level or youth level?
Well, all you have to look at is the number of kids. I mean, in any class, there are so many kids that have had bad experiences. I think more kids have had bad experiences in sports than good experiences in sports, which is kind of sad.
Right. How can players understand that their production on the field doesn't determine themselves as a person, and that doesn't directly correlate to what kind of person they are, who they are, and what they mean to other people outside of the game?
Well, I like the sentence, because of this something good will happen. You train hard, you work hard, you play hard, and then whatever happens, I mean, it might turn out that you might not make the major leagues, but you might make the major leagues as a manager, You just never know. You can't just say, well, my batting average is 250. That means I'm a failure at life. You might learn more from that than anything. Yeah. I tell the story in class about Herb Brooks. In 1960, he was the last person cut from the Olympic hockey team. And the United States Olympic hockey team beat the Soviet Union for the gold medal in hockey in the Olympics. And he's watching. He was cut 2 weeks before the Olympics started. And he's watching the final game, the gold medal game, with his father. And all of his friends win the gold medals. And he's back in Minnesota watching the game with his father. And his father said, well, Herbie, I guess the coach cut the right guy. And it took him 20 years for him to get his gold medal with the Miracle on Ice. So he didn't make the team, but he made the team as the Olympic coach 20 years later.
Yeah.
So because being cut from the team probably motivated him to become the coach.
And also throughout those experiences, you create lifelong friendships, you create experiences that other people won't have while you're on that path. And a lot of people look at, the goal is to get to the highest level, and they won't be happy until they get there. But in reality, you got to enjoy the whole process of that experience and journey.
If you don't have fun playing the game, you're not going to have fun winning the game,
Right. Do you believe too many players look at a game like baseball or football as life and death, and that there's too much of an emphasis on that winning?
Well, when I talk about this, you could make a game important or you can make a game special. And all the games are important, every practice is important, everything's important, but you don't want to make it special. You say, oh my God, they're scouting me today. Oh my God, the college coach is here today. Oh my God, my parents are here today. When you say things to yourself like, this is it, it's now or never, it's do or die, there's no tomorrow. I call those the 14 killer words. Then you're taking something that's important, you make it special. So imagine you have an interview for a job and you say, oh, this is the most important interview of my life. If I don't get this job, I might as well die, Right. You're probably not going to interview well. Right. If you're up at bat, well, Coach McCarthy tells this story. There was a state championship baseball game down at Toms River. And I think it's bottom of the seventh inning, 2 outs, bases loaded, and the star hitter is up. And all of a sudden, his father walked behind the cage, and he said, hey. And his son looks at him and he says, I've been waiting my whole life for this at bat.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And of course, he just hit a little grounder to second.
Yeah.
It's going to be stuck in the kid's head when he's at bat.
Yeah.
It's crazy. What you hear, parents yelling from the stands at directed towards their player or directed at the coach to do this or do that.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah, we're just taking it a little too seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, Willie Stargell, we talked about him in class the other day, the great Pittsburgh Pirates captain in the, I think, 70s. And they said, Willie, what's your secret? He said, well, I just listen to what the umpire says after they play the national anthem. And what does the umpire say? He said, play ball. He said, I play ball, I don't work ball. I go to the ballpark to play, not to work.
Right.
Yeah. And hopefully, as we move forward, kids will start to understand this better, and parents and coaches will create more of a fun environment for the kids and a way for them to truly maximize their opportunity to play the game. Because it's supposed to be fun at the end of the day.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
I mean, you play baseball, you don't work baseball.
Exactly. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.